Hello, I am Jamey from Stonemaier Games, and I'm here today with another special guest to share a top 10 list in total, 5 games from each of us. This is Josh, who suggested the topic of multi-use cards. Josh, can you let everybody know who you are and what your connection is to Stonemaier Games and why you chose this topic?
Sure. I'm Josh Derrig. I'm from Akron, Ohio. I was originally kind of introduced to board gaming with Scythe and Lords of Hellas. So two of my earliest games that kind of got me into the hobby in general. Um, as far as multi-use cards go, the reason I suggested that is it's kind of one of my favorite design tools. Whenever you find a game that has a card that has multiple different purposes, I feel like you can adjust your play even on the fly. You get your turn, you think you know what you're doing, but maybe you can adjust, and it's built right into the cards.
I think that's a great summary of why this is a really fun mechanism to play around with, both when you're playing games and designing games. So what we're going to do today, I'm going to share some picks from ambassadors, Stonemaier Games ambassadors, and briefly, and then we'll go through a few different aspects of this topic and culminate in our top 5 list.
Sure.
I'll start off. Oh, and I should mention up front, let's talk about just briefly how we define multi-use cards. The way that I approached this was I looked at games that have cards where the multiple uses are built into the cards themselves. And so I did not include games like Wingspan. Like in Wingspan, the main way to use cards is to play them, to play bird cards on your mat. But you can also, at times, tuck cards under other cards. That is a multiple use of a card, but I didn't include it here because that isn't inherently built into every card. And Seven Wonders is another classic example of this, where on your turn in Seven Wonders, you can play a card or you can discard it to gain 3 coins. Definitely, I think, in the broader category of multiple use cards, but because it isn't built into the card design itself, I didn't include it.
Yeah, I would
totally fair if you did. Okay.
No, I think I only really even included one where the 2 uses aren't directly on the cards, or maybe more than 2 uses.
Cool. I do understand that anyone watching this who wants to share their thoughts in the comments, totally fair if you include games in that category. I can definitely see that being included. So the ambassador picks for this category, these are games selected by multiple ambassadors, were Beer and Bread, Boonlake, Bruges, Dune Imperium, Frosthaven and Gloomhaven, Ginkgopolis, Glory to Rome, It's a Wonderful World, La Granja, Lisboa, Mage Knight, Maracaibo, Marvel Champions, Oh My Goods, Race for the Galaxy, Raiders of the North Sea, and Tiny Epic Vikings. Any on that list that you haven't tried that you're curious about?
Actually, I haven't tried a lot of those. But a couple of the ones that'll make my list were on there too. So
yeah, it was a good topic to choose. People seemed excited to share their picks for this one. I also included a short list of evolving cards. So I also didn't quite include these as multi-use cards, but I think this is an interesting subtopic of cards that can get better based on multiple uses or some other status in the game. For example, in my new game, Expeditions has cards that you can play as cards, but they also have cards that you can tuck under your mat to enhance your mat. So you are using the card for multiple purposes, and it kind of is also built into the cards. Maybe I could have included that, but at the point of playing a card, there's only one purpose for these cards, so I didn't include it. The other ones on the list are Shards of Infinity, which have a mastery mechanism that makes cards better. SolForge Fusion, where cards are replaced by upgraded versions of that exact card. Aquatica, where you're also tucking cards and kind of sliding cards up and activating different benefits under your mat. Magic the Gathering has a bunch of different cards that evolve, and like double-sided cards and cards that level up. And then a recent game, Revive, has a mechanism a little bit similar to Expeditions or Aquatica. What are your thoughts, I guess, quick thoughts on evolving cards like that?
Well, I played a good amount of SolForge Fusion, and I do it's a different mechanism, but it's still a very useful one, and it's kind of a fun design when you get to upgrade the exact card. It generally has a very similar effect, but it's just better as you get the game. Expeditions, I feel like Expeditions falls pretty closer to the multi-use card, because even though, like you said, it's only one printed on it, the 3 types of the quests, the items, and the meteorites, that's still printed on the card, and you know where those get tucked, and the direct endgame benefit is tied to what kind it is. And honestly, I think that would have been on my top 5 list. It's an honorable mention for me, but we've just got it in. I think I've played it like 3 times so far, but it's quickly becoming a game that my wife and I like to play.
I'm glad to hear that. And you're right, on Expeditions, it is printed on the cards. Like when you meld the meteorite, you literally turn the card sideways and it has printed on the card the meld benefit. I was just
Yeah,
thinking maybe it doesn't count because when you play the card, although even then, yeah, you're probably right. It does count.
yeah, because you
It
get the
will count.
resource, you get one of the
Yeah.
two, power, guile, and then if you have the worker, there's still another thing you get. So I feel like it's got
Yeah.
2 to 3 uses per card, and they're clear,
We'll
which is
count
always
it.
helpful.
I won't use it for my list, but I do have actually Expeditions and Red Rising then, or the other Stonemaier game I can think of where the multiple uses in Red Rising are built into the card. You're either retaining the card in your hand for endgame scoring, or you are playing the card for its deploy benefit.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that definitely would be out.
So let's jump into our list, starting with honorable mentions. Do you have any honorable mentions you'd like to mention?
Well, obviously, as I'd said, Expeditions, I think if we had done this list a little bit later, might even be on my list. Another one would be Mottainai. That was originally on my list, I think, even when I emailed it to you. It's just, it's not a game I own, and it's not a game that I've played very recently, but I remember liking it a lot, and I really liked how the cards, depending on which side of your player board, have a very... Yeah, I froze.
Oh, okay. You're back now. Yeah, I wasn't sure if that was me or you. Yeah. You were talking about Mottainai when it froze, I think.
Yeah, it just again, it's a game that would have been on my list, probably even when I first sent it to you. Just I don't own it and I haven't played it as much recently, but I really like the way that they use those cards. I think they have 3 or 4 different uses depending on which of the 4 sides of your player board you put them on, where they're either...
Well, Josh is freezing a little bit here. I'll note that I have not played Mottainai yet. I played Innovation. I'm guessing some of you might have. Oh, hi, you're back. I was just talking while you were frozen. It's okay.
Yeah, so again, that Mottainai, and then a couple other ones that I guess most of Awakened Realms games that I have all...
Awakened Realms. I think Josh is going to mention ISS Vanguard and Aetherfields here are the ones that he sent me in advance. Josh did send me this list in advance, and Mottainai was on it, so it sounds like the list has changed a little bit. So I'm curious to see what his top 5 is now that that it's evolved a little bit.
Am I back again? Jeez,
you are back again. You are back again. I mentioned ISS Vanguard and Aetherfields while you were frozen because I figured you were going to talk about those.
Yeah. So and even so, Lords of Ragnarok and Lords of Hellas, their combat cards are obviously they're dual use depending on whether you're fighting a monster or fighting opponents, and they have the top and the bottom of the card. But I guess with those, I guess they're only honorable mentions because they're a little bit less of the direct gameplay. It's only about 1/3 of what you might be doing in that game.
That makes sense. Yeah. Cool. Oh, and I
even
have
Nemesis.
Nemesis. That's true. Yeah, Nemesis you discard in the combat. Yeah. Yeah, I can see a few of those games behind you on your shelf. It's a nicely displayed shelf.
Yes, big of a Awakened Realms and Stonemaier fan.
So some honorable mentions that I had were Western Legends that has like essentially playing cards built into the cards, so you can play them during the poker mini game in the game, or you can play them as cards. Maracaibo, Root is a pretty ingenious system in that the cards are used in a variety of ways based on which faction you're playing. La Granja has card tucking. Revive, I mentioned before from Ambassadors. Space Base was really borderline for me, but Space Base does kind of have cards for multiple uses in that you are slotting cards into your mat to use in one way, and then when you use that same number, you flip the card over and slide it under your mat. And then Raiders of the North Sea, really close to making the list. It was really close between that and my number 5. So why don't we jump into the top 5? And Josh, you have thrown me for a loop today because I thought Mottainai was on your list, but obviously your list has changed a little bit since you sent it to me. Do you want to share your top 5? I think Josh might be temporarily frozen again. When he comes back, I might suggest that Josh turns off the video, so you may not get to see Josh for the rest of the video. Oh, hey Josh, do you want to try turning off the video? Sometimes if there's people won't get to see you, but it should stop, or maybe it will stop freezing. If it's just streaming audio. If you click the stop video button in the bottom left, we'll give that a try and see if it works.
Let's see.
You try that? Cool. And so we're on your number 5, Josh. You want to talk about that?
Okay, sure. So for my number 5, I'm going to go with ISS Vanguard. I have a couple of cards here in front of me, so I can talk about them. Obviously, my video is now gone. But with those cards, it's nice. They each on the top of the card, the first half, have what they can do. Some let you reroll cards, some let you ignore an injury that you might gain. Some let you help other players if they're in your sector with you. But the bottom half of each card has something called a dice check, where die that you roll, if they match the symbols, you can discard those die to gain the benefit that's at the bottom of the card. So kind of, situational, but they're nice to have, two different options that each card can do for you.
That's cool. That's a neat little mechanism there. Do you always roll the dice, or is it an option? Like if you want to roll the dice to try to trigger this benefit?
So each in ISS Vanguard, one of the things that you're doing is you're going around the map. Each general location has what's called a special action, and the whole game operates through what's called a dice check, and you roll your hand of die depending on how many you feel like rolling and which colors and symbols you're trying to go for. Okay. And you'll have to spend some of those to either defeat a monster or unlock something in that location. But leftover die that you haven't used, so if you roll a few symbols that you weren't needed, or even sometimes colors, you can use as what's called in the dice check to also gain something. Like one lets you draw 3 cards, another one lets you discard an injury. So leftover die still have a use even if they didn't help you fulfill your goal.
That's pretty cool. I like that. I need to try that one.
Yeah, we're not super far. I think we're about 6 or 7 missions in, but we've enjoyed it.
Nice. So that is ISS Vanguard at Josh's number 5. My number 5, the one that barely knocked Raiders of the North Sea off my list, is Beer and Bread. I played this game fairly recently. This is a 2-player event. Yeah, I played the game for the first time very recently. It's a 2-player only game where you are making beer and bread for the most part. And every card has a few different uses on it. You can use it as a goal, so you can try to complete the goal of that card, spending resources to complete it. You can also spend it to get more resources, and there's a tucking element too for some of the cards. You can upgrade your player mat, all in the motion of playing a card. So all those things are part of playing a card. I think it's a really clever system, and I think that Beer and Bread highlights that the idea that many games might give you multiple decks where you're like drawing a goal card or drawing a resource card or drawing an upgrade card. But this is a good reminder to me as a designer that you can combine all those things into one card, as long as the card isn't too cluttered, to consolidate it and have one single deck with a lot of interesting choices. There's also a neat hand passing mechanism in Beer and Bread. Are you familiar with this one, Josh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I haven't played it myself, but I'm familiar with the game. It's definitely one that interests me. It's just sometimes, with 2-player games specifically, my wife and I already have a pretty big backlog.
Yeah. I hear that. Yeah, it's designed specifically for 2 players. But yeah, Beer and Bread, really clever system. That's my number 5. What about your number 4?
My number 4, I was also going to stick with an Awakened Realms game, but this one I'm going to go with Aetherfields. Aetherfields probably wouldn't make even a top 10 list for me as far as one of my favorites, but I do like it. But it shares a mechanism that I feel like a lot of games kind of utilize, but in a slightly different way. Obviously, a lot of head-to-head card games, you have to discard cards to be able to play something. And like you said in, I think 7 Wonders, you discard a card for 3 money. But in this, each card, besides having its normal function of whatever the text is, and you can play the cards for that, it has 3 color systems, which red is Wrath, yellow is Cunning, and green is Awareness. And so each card might be 2 green or 2 yellow or 1 red. And so you have to specifically discard the correct cards to get to, you might need Wrath to do this action. So I might need to find a 1 red and a 2 red to get myself 3 Wrath, or, need a combination of a couple of cards to get myself some Awareness to, accomplish whatever it is I'm trying to do on my turn. Plus that's each really card, cool. Like I said, does have text on it that you can play for it directly. And then it might even say this one costs, and you have to discard something else from your hand to pay for it. The other nice part about these cards is your starting character deck, the backs of each card actually have an action on them. So if it's at the top of your draw pile, you can play it directly from there. Cards you gain during the game aren't your starting deck, so those actually don't have that benefit. But all your starting cards actually have a backside printed. You have an action available to you if it's on the top of your draw deck.
That is really, really clever. I think that's a hugely underused space in the game design world, using the back of cards for something.
Yeah, it was the first time I've seen it, and I liked it a lot.
I think the only time, well, maybe not the only time, but the most memorable time I've seen it is in, shoot, I'm going to blank on the name, but there's a hidden movement game where you're hunting a vampire, and it has cards that have that mechanism. They're not multiple uses. It triggers events in that game, but they were able to make the deck shuffleable by kind of hiding the unique element of the card right in the middle of the card. So if you're only looking at the edges, they're still easy to shuffle, and you can't tell the difference between the cards. Is that what they do in either fields, or is it visible?
Actually, you cut out there. I did not hear any of the description of that last game.
I'm sorry.
We had been good until there.
I was talking about a vampire themed hidden movement game that I'm blanking on the name of. Where what is the name? I don't know, but it doesn't use multi-use cards, but it uses cards
The backs
with the backs have a trigger on them, and it's hidden right in the middle of the card, so you can still shuffle the cards without seeing if there is a hidden event icon in the middle of it. I was curious if the Etherfield's cards kind of hide the icon while you're shuffling, or if it's very apparent while you're shuffling which cards have the special icons.
It's pretty apparent. You have your character's picture on the back of each card as opposed to the normal influence deck that just has the generic backgrounds. So you do know where your cards are. That's
cool. So hidden multiple uses of cards, including the backs of the cards. Really clever with Etherfields. My number 4 is Lost Ruins of Arnak. So this is a deck building game that uses cards that have a benefit here that you can use. And like the core benefit, the written benefit, or iconological benefit, but they also have a benefit in the upper left here related to kind of movement. This is related to where you can place workers. So you can either use one of these cards to place a worker, like this one lets you place a worker on a space that requires 1 boat. You can also combine multiple cards together, like if I have the tent and the parrot here. If I have the parrot and a hat, I could place a worker on a space that requires 2 ship movement. So I could discard multiple cards for that purpose, or I could use one of these cards for the benefit on the card itself. I really like Lost Ruins of Arnak in general, the theme, the mechanisms, but I like the variability and the flexibility that the cards offer, especially when I really want to place a worker on a specific spot, balancing that versus this powerful benefit of a card that I want to play the card for. Yeah, do you have any thoughts about Lost Ruins of Arnak, Josh?
Yeah, actually, it's funny. Lost Ruins of Arnak is a game I enjoy, and it just slipped my mind when making this list. And when I was telling my wife when we were setting up today, she was like, "What about Lost Ruins of Arnak?" And it didn't even occur to me that those are absolutely multi-use cards, and I like the way that they're used. It didn't ring a bell when I was making my list.
Well, yeah, I agree. It's one that's kind of subtle in how it uses that secondary use, but it's a very useful element to the game. So that's Lost Ruins of Arnak at number 4. What is your number 3 favorite game with multi-use cards?
All right, my number 3 is the one that's kind of the lightest use of the multi-use part. It's Concordia. But what I like about this game, where each card is you're gonna play an action card on each of your turns to determine what you're doing that turn. But the bottom half of each card also lists which god is associated with that card. And those trigger how much points you'll score at the end of the game, depending on how many cities you've built, maybe different provinces you're in, specific production. So while they don't really have a second use during the game, they kind of inform your strategy. So if you're spreading out and you're in a lot of places, you might specifically collect more of that card that it's going to score you better there. Or if you've collected those cards per se, you might choose to do actions that are going to better that score for you.
Yeah, this is a great pick that completely slipped my mind when I was making my list, similar to what you said about Lost Ruins of Arnak. I was a little bad when I saw it on your list. I was like, what is the other use of the cards? I think you're just playing them, but you're absolutely right. They do have that secondary use at the end of the game. And there isn't that much of a choice in the game to like get rid of cards. I don't think you get rid of cards very much at all in Concordia, maybe not even at all, but you're totally right. When you're selecting that card, that is a huge part of that decision. You're not only selecting it for the play benefit, but also for what you're gaining at the end of the game if you continue to get cards of that color. It's a great pick.
There's been games I've been playing of Concordia where my hand's already good enough to do all the actions, and in the last round I see the game's about to end, I might just buy another card or 2 from the display just because they happen to go with the points I'm scoring.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's a wonderful pick. Concordia, you're number 3. I have another 2-player game. In fact, I have 3 2-player games on my list. The second one is Radlands at number 3. Radlands is a dueling card game where most of the cards have a core benefit that you're going to use them for. But one of my favorite things about the game, just a little tweak, is that in the upper right-hand corner of the cards in Radlands, there is an instant benefit that you can gain by simply trashing the card at any time. So anytime that you need like an extra water, or there's a variety of icons up there. Water is one of them, but they didn't limit it to just one icon, which I thought was really clever. But there are many times in the game where you just need like one more thing to pull off an impressive play or a crucial play to not lose ground in the game. You can always trash a card. And if you do so, there's definitely a sense of loss because you're losing the more powerful benefit on the card. But it's really nice to have that instant benefit option if you want it. I think it's called like a junk benefit maybe in the game. Thematically, that makes sense. Have you played Radlands, Josh?
I have not. It is a few people in my game group actually have raved about it, so I'd love to try it. Just in general, head-to-head dueling card games, I'm pretty heavy invested in Keyforge and SolForge. So finding time to play another 2-player head-to-head dueling hasn't happened yet.
Yeah, I hear that. Yeah, it's a you kind of pick your lanes, I think, with those dueling card games. That's actually one of the reasons that Beer and Bread was so refreshing to me, because even though it is a dueling game, I'm not fighting my opponent in any way. But Radlands is a dueling game that I very much enjoyed for the multi-use cards in particular. Number 2. What is your number 2 favorite game in this category?
So my number 2, I'm going to lump these together. I do not consider them the same game, as far as Frosthaven, Gloomhaven, maybe even Jaws of the Lion. But if I was to put them all in my top 5, they'd all make it. But the cards obviously used the exact same way. For anybody who hasn't played it, you always play 2 cards in your turn, and you're going to use the top benefit of one and the bottom benefit of the other. But what I really like about in Gloomhaven or Frosthaven here is that you may very distinctly want to play the top half of this card and the bottom half of the second card, and then your turn may come around. You've already played your cards because you have to all play them simultaneously, and maybe the monsters have moved on me, or my opponent has dealt with one of the enemies I thought I was targeting. So you can change there on the fly and choose a different. You can flip the your choices. You also obviously have initiatives on both cards that you can use, and you pick that before your turn. So they all have numbers printed on them, whether you're trying to go faster or slower. And like in plenty of games, you can discard a card if you need to try to avoid damage or something along those lines. So they have multiple uses, but the main use really is playing 2 cards out and using the top or the bottom action.
There's also the default. Is it like move 1, attack 1?
It's move 2 or attack 2 printed on every card. Okay. So if you ever have to just do the basic action, you obviously have there's a lot of flexibility. So even though your turn may not come out exactly how you had planned, I feel like you always have something you can try to do.
That's really cool. Yeah, there are 3 great uses of cards for the initiative, their powerful benefits, and then their default benefits, the 2 move, 2 attack. And you're right, I had never thought about how much that flexibility adds to the game, since you are kind of programming your play, but you're not entirely programming which part of the cards you're going to use until your turn comes around. Yeah, that's a great pick. I really like that pick, Josh. My number 2 is my final 2-player only game, and that is the game Watergate. Watergate is a bit of a simulation of the Watergate scandal that happened in the US years ago. But it's a wonderful tug of war game between 2 players. And on your turn, you can either play a card for its kind of primary benefit, or you can use it for the tug of war element of the game, which is a crucial part of the game. Like I think sometimes with these some of these multi-use cards, even some that I've mentioned here, there's almost like a throwaway benefit, a backup benefit. But in Watergate, the tug of war is such an important part of the game that there are many times where it feels really good to use the card for its tug of war benefit. It's also a nice balancing mechanism because for cards that have a powerful tug of war benefit, like it's saying pull a token 5 spaces towards you, that's a huge benefit in this game, then it might have a weaker built-in benefit, and vice versa. If there's a really powerful written benefit or built-in benefit, it might have a weaker tug of war benefit. And so I like that use of multi-use cards to give you a range of choices, but also to balance the cards themselves.
Yeah, that sounds like an interesting one. Other than having heard the name, I guess I don't know too much about that game, but it definitely seems like an interesting take.
Yeah, it's a really neat use of tug of war, which is a mechanism that I also love. So yeah, that's my Watergate number 2. We're down to our number 1 favorite games that use multi-use cards. I'm really curious about your pick here. What did you pick for number 1 and why?
All right, so my number 1 is Granja. It's probably, it's a top, so many game for me. Maybe top 10. Definitely my top played on BGA. But more so than it's my favorite game to play. I just love the design of it. I think that the cards are some of the best cards I've seen in any game, where each card itself is 4 distinct cards in it. And it allows you to, each time you get a hand of cards at the start of the game, you have so many options in front of you. And unlike other games where you maybe adjust on the fly on turn to turn, you probably hem yourself into a strategy pretty early here, but you might, more cards you collect, even if the top doesn't maybe align with your strategy, the side might, or the bottom might. And even if not, the left of every card is still a field that you would gain one of the 3 resources that you can gain. So each card's just, has so many different uses, and it makes the game infinitely replayable because it's already got, you have over 100 cards here, and each one's 4 cards.
So I'm curious here. You've mentioned a bunch of cards on your list that use either 2, 3, or even 4 now benefits. Do you think there's a sweet spot? And is there such thing as a multi-use card that has too many uses, where it's almost too overwhelming? Because like you said right there, in La Granja, if you have a hand of, say, 5 cards, that's essentially 20 different cards in your hand based on all the uses. Is that
tons of different combinations?
You like? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think it would depend. I think 4 probably in a lot of games would be too much information. And Mottainai, I think also it's similar to La Granja, where you have a player board, and depending on which of the 4 places you play it might change what it does. But with these, I think it's nice is the left and the right side are very, very straightforward. There's not like there's a lot of decision making. It's just, if you tuck it on your left side, you're either going to gain a wheat or a grape. What's the other resource? Olives. So you're either going to gain those resources at the start of each round, or if you put it on your left side, it's going to allow you to draw 1 more card into your hand and maybe add another money. Or I think the second benefit down there is a slot for pigs, which is the 4th type of thing you can deliver, but it's not, you obviously don't grow pigs. You gain them in other ways in the game. So those, it's not like you have a use for those cards if the top or the bottom doesn't really play into your strategy, but I don't feel like it's too overwhelming, because that benefit's very straightforward. The real place that you play them, that you have a lot of decisions to make as far as your strategy, is if you tuck them below your board, as each has a text print on their specific helpers, and they may help you gain more of one resource, may help you upgrade something, get extra deliveries, extra slots for something that you might be gaining during the game. So, and you only get to play 3. You could play a 4th, but you'd just have to cover up one that you've already played. So that's where your real decision making is coming. Is you want to make sure that those kind of gel together, especially with whatever you're trying to do in the game. And then the top of the card, you just play up. It's spots for deliveries, and so they're going to have printed like 2, 3, or 4 little slots where you might make a delivery to, as opposed to the main board. So they're little personal delivery spaces for yourself.
That's I think yeah. Go ahead.
I was just say, other than that, I think 2 is probably the sweet spot for most games.
As you were describing that, I was thinking that maybe one of the helping factors for me, at least, if a card does have a lot of benefits that are spread over the card, is, when I'm holding cards in hand, I'm pretty much only seeing the first card in my hand and then the upper left icon and maybe a little bit on the left. So it's helpful for me, and most of the games we talked about today actually don't fit into this category, but if a card does have a bunch of benefits spread out all over the card, I often like the game to let me play open-handed. That way I can just put them on the table and look at the cards, look at all elements of the cards. A lot of the games that we talked really don't allow that. Like Gloomhaven, you can't do that open-handed unless you're way across the table from the other players. La Granja, you probably could. You say you play on Board Game Arena a lot, so you're essentially playing open-handed and the other players can't see you. Yeah.
I think that makes it the easiest. It's my most played game on BGA, and they're spread out in front of me, and I can look at each card. When I'm playing in person, at least if you're peeking at the cards, the left or the right side is going to have 1 or 2 things that it could possibly have. But usually Yeah, if you're not playing open-handed, if the card has too much information on it, you can't keep you're going to be peeking a lot, maybe distracting from seeing what other players are doing at the table.
Yeah. Yeah, just something to keep in mind for game design. But I love that you talked about La Granja in detail. It's one that I'm now curious to get back to the table. It's been a while. I'll have to try it on Board Game Arena. My favorite game does swing back to the simpler elements of using a card for multiple purpose, and that is Dune Imperium. Dune Imperium uses cards for two primary purposes, although they kind of slipped a third purpose in here as well. So here's some cards from Dune Imperium. In Dune Imperium, you are typically playing a card on your turn to show where you were allowed to place a worker. So for this card, it's saying I'm allowed to place a worker on the Imperial track. There's some other examples here, different places where you're allowed to place a worker on your turn. And in addition to that, and this is kind of multiple uses built into a single play of the card, you're also gaining this benefit in the gray banner right there. So two interesting uses related to worker placement and just a benefit from playing the card. Dune Imperium also adds an element of the cards that you don't play on your worker placement turns carry over, they stay in your hand, and you get to use them for their bottom benefit. In fact, here's a card that doesn't even have a bottom benefit, but most of them do. And this is a good example of what many of the cards have. They either have influence or they have combat. This one happens to have both. And so if I decide not to play this card, then at the end of the round, I have a turn where it's kind of a pass turn, but on that pass turn, I'm doing substantial things like acquiring more cards by spending influence or establishing my final military prowess for that round using the military benefits. And some cards even have more complex benefits like this one. So I really like this decision point in Dune Imperium. Am I using a card to place a worker to gain the benefit during the round, or am I holding it back and saving it for my final turn of that round to help me in combat or help me acquire more cards that helps the engine building for that game? Really interesting use of in my opinion, of multi-use cards. Have you played this one, Josh, Dune Imperium?
I've only played it once, but obviously it's a great design. I feel like you said, it doesn't feel overly complex the way that they're being used, but they're influential in the game itself.
Yeah. They add some interesting decision points to the game. Well, Josh, this is a lot of fun to think about. I didn't even realize how in depth and how really important multi-use cards are until we talked about this in detail. It's inspiring to me as a designer to maybe use them more often in my games. So thank you for suggesting this topic. You can turn your camera back on maybe for the end here while we say goodbye. Do you have anything else that you'd like to add to the topic or about gaming in general before we sign off?
No, because the only thing I was going to talk about at the end was expeditions, but we ended up both mentioning it at the beginning, obviously for honorable mention, and just talking about multi-use cards in general. But no, obviously, I feel like a few of my.
I think Josh got cut off a little bit in his signing off. Thank you, anyone who watched through the video. I know that we had a little technical difficulties here, but it was still really fun for me to hear Josh's perspective on this topic. Sorry, Josh, you cut off a little bit there, but
yeah, trying to put on the video. Apparently, that just.
It doesn't want it. It doesn't
want to do it.
Well, it was great to talk to you about this today. Thank you for taking the time to inspire the topic.
Thank you for having me. Sorry about all the technical difficulties, but it was still nice to get into the topic.
Yeah, no worries at all. And I really look forward to hearing what people think in the comments. Hopefully they can think of some games, some multi-use cards games that we didn't even think of. I'd love to hear what people, maybe their favorite pick from each of our list and anyone's favorite, other favorite game that we didn't mention. Let me know in the comments here. All right, Josh, thank you so much for your time.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right. Take care. Bye.
Bye.